I can pretty much take questions along any end of the spectrum. So why don't we go ahead and start from there? By the way, I'm gonna make two quick caveats. First, this is the first time I've done a Zoom PowerPoint presentation, so bear with me if things go a little off the rails. Hopefully not much. And two, I have cats. They love me very much, and they will probably jump up, show themselves on the screen, and show everybody how much they love me. So be prepared for that. And I want to make clear, this is as much conversation as presentation. So I want to have a free-flowing exchange, even as I unpack a lot of ideas here in these 54 slides. But if we don't get through everything, the slides will be there for you to refer to, and I will make clear that how to get a hold of me afterwards if you want to continue a conversation. So let's start with, this is, I call it self-editing for fiction and narrative nonfiction, which includes memoir. And first of all, I want to take the temperature here. Who is working on a nonfiction book length project? Just say yes.
Yes.
Anybody else? How about a novel?
Yep, we're working on the novel, Adventures.
Okay. Good. And anybody doing something else like journalism or some sort of structured writing like essays or professional communications, that sort of thing?
Yes.
All right. Okay, that gives us a sense of the ground on which we stand. So I'll just quickly run through what I hope to cover in these decks, if not completely in these 2 hours. I want to show why editing yourself is an absolute necessity, and why nobody else will do it for you until you hire somebody to do it for you. I want to show how self-editing makes you ready for the editor you do hire when it's time, before you consider presenting your book to a literary agent or pitch to a publishing house. You need, your work has to be as absolute, complete, and polished as possible. So I'm going to show you some simple hacks to get to the point where you can start your self-editing journey and then get into the deeper issues with your book if those exist. And I'm going to talk a lot about how a lot of manuscripts go wrong at the beginning, and there are some common issues in my experience with more than 1,000. I've worked with probably 2,000 manuscripts over those 14 years and more than 1,000 authors. So, but I kept track of a handful of very common things that go wrong from the very beginning matters, and we'll get into those. And at the end, I'll share with you some of my favorite resources, guidebooks, and websites for going deeper. So let's move on to the next slide. Okay. So just to be clear, again, we're covering fiction writing, narrative nonfiction, memoir, including memoir, and we'll touch on long-form journalism, including grant writing, because I know a lot of you folks are considering pursuing grant opportunities from the Arts Council. And so let's start by talking a little bit about how to best prepare a grant proposal. And I'm going to ask Scarlett to kind of captain that part of this adventure. So, okay. Scarlett, you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was like, okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about grant writing and how it's similar here, especially because I know some of the people in the room are thinking about applying for grants, and I do encourage you, as Arkansas Arts Council, to start with us. We're very easy with the grant writing. We will walk you through the processes. And in fact, if you have any questions specifically about our grant, some of our people that run grant programs are here. And so just put it in the chat and we would be happy to connect with you either later or to point you in the right direction. Some of the things though, from a person who reviews grants. So I have sat for the National Endowment for the Arts, for Challenge America, Mid-America Arts Alliance, and for, Vermont Arts Council and Topeka, Kansas, several other organizations for their grants. And one of the big things that people don't understand about when they're writing a grant is that you are probably one of 50 that the one particular judge might look at. And so if you're not concise, it's not like we're people. So it's not like we do this intentionally, but it's really hard when you get to like number 40 to figure out what you're trying to say. So the idea is that you need to be clear and concise and right up front about what it is that you want and why it matters. So I talk about this a little bit with the inverted pyramid idea from reporting. And that is when we create a lead. I used to be a reporter for like 15 years. I think it damaged my head. But anyway, you definitely need to put the who, what, when, where, why, and how much in the first 2 sentences, just like, and then you need to be able to tell your story. So it's really important to make sure that you are, when you're looking at your words and you're going to tell your story, and this includes your artist bio and statement, that you are very concise, specific, and clear. And so those are the biggest things that I can talk about with grant writing in particular. And usually there is a place, if you're a nonprofit organization, they want you to explain what you are and what your mission is. Make sure that you are being very upfront about what it is that you do and why it matters. And another thing that I find a lot of times that people don't do is they don't add any kind of analytics, data, statistics, anything. And so when you get down, if I'm reviewing Vermont, I don't know your nonprofit organization, or if I'm reviewing for the National Endowment for the Arts, I don't know what it's like to live in Washington State. And so if I don't have numbers that show how important what your organization does is, or even sort of census data to indicate what your group is like, and who you're serving and why, that's a really hard ask, especially because most grant processes don't allow the reviewer to go and Google anything. So everything is really all encompassing. And so I've on the other end, I've had it the other way. So I don't review I don't review Arts Council information panel. I might, cursory make sure everything's there for the panel to review, but I don't go through it and analyze it like this. When we're building a panel, however, we have to, ask them to do the same thing. So we always say, hey, don't go and Google anything. Like, you need to use exactly what the person put in their application and submitted. And that can be really problematic. I once had a fellowship. So I run the Individual Artist Fellowship Awards. Those are $5,000 grants to individual creatives who live and work in Arkansas and who are in one of 6 categories, and those categories change. So, and I won't tell you who, but this is a great example. I once had a panel with panelists from out of state, and the person who submitted their application had a wonderful portfolio, but they never explained what the Elaine Massacre was in Arkansas history, or what they were doing. And they were doing sort of a portfolio look at, it was a photographer, so different images that were connected to this. And I don't want to give too much away, but the problem was, and the reason he did not get a high enough score to receive an award was he did not give that background. So even though I know about that and I can tell the panelists about it, they can't use that information. And I think, I can't say for sure, but I think that really cost him getting the grant. So when you're looking at your grant proposal, or you're looking at your fellowship and your submissions, make sure that you're putting in that context. You are adding the numbers that show why this matters. You're putting your ask way up front. You're being very deliberate about, who you are, what you do, and why it matters. And really that's the key component that I wanted to talk about for this part of the grant process. And I know a lot of people are not doing grants. It looks like playwriting and different kinds, but I did want to make sure that I touched on that. And part of the stuff that Jim is going to talk about here in just a few minutes is going to really encompass stuff you can do, even fiction writing, nonfiction writing, whatever writing you do. You can go back and you can look at your words, and then you can reduce those words and make that more concise. And that's really important too, because a lot of the grants that we're looking at, including the Catalyze grant, by the way, so there's a $10,000 Catalyze grant through Mid-America Arts Alliance that is open right now. And, it asks for your resume, your artist statement, your artist bio, some other items. And it's going to require you to be able to write down all of that and put in context about what you do and why you do it and how you do it. And, you're going to have to meet only a certain number of words. So each of these only allow you a certain amount of space, like 250 words, or, I think one has 1,000 words. But overall, if you are long-winded and you don't go back and cut and look at what you're writing, that will cost you that grant, because you're going to be competing with probably more than 150 people just in the Central Arkansas area for that grant. So if you have any questions, I'm here. I'm going to let Jim go back to his thing, but I wanted to put that out there. Hopefully we will have a panel, maybe a panel discussion about grant writing in the future, or a workshop on grant writing. I am working on that. Also, I just want to point out that our fellowship grants, the $5,000 grants that I just talked about, it is open to memoir and novel writing this year. And so that's another reason why I thought having an expert in editing would be a great time for you to review and look at and kind of contemplate what you're submitting and like how you go about your words. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Scarlett, why don't we skip ahead of these slides and go back to the get down to the self-editing portion. And just to make clear, that information is there. These slide decks will be available to you after the session, and refer to those when putting out your deck, or putting out your grant proposal, sorry. So let's get to self-editing and rewriting. Now, when I talk, I'm going to talk a lot about in terms of my default setting is novel, but the self-editing principles, the rewriting principles that apply to fiction also apply just as well to narrative nonfiction, like memoir. There's, you're under the same requirement to not waste words, to hook people emotionally. And so even if I say novel, consider that it applies to the whole spectrum of long form narrative writing. So a lot of famous authors will tell you that all writing is rewriting, that and here we go. This is from a Pulitzer Prize winning author named Richard North Patterson, and he really just lays it out there for you. So let's move on from that. So I want to give you the lay of the land when it comes to book publishing, just so you understand the need for you to do a lot of your own heavy lifting when it comes to editing. There was a time when, editors at publishing houses and literary agents very patiently worked with authors through multiple drafts, doing what they call blue pencil editing. Those days have been gone for quite a while. Nowadays, there is a risk-averse blockbuster mindset at major publishing houses and even smaller ones. Publishing is a business. They want to honor art and craft, but the bottom line rules all. And editors will be the people you deal with at a publishing house, as well as your literary agent if you get one. But the people who make the bottom line decisions about whether or not your book is actually going to be published and show up in a bookstore are the marketing departments. And they're backed by a ton of research, the kind that Scarlett was referring to when talking about the need to have data in your grant proposal. So your job is to make sure that before you seek out an agent or a publisher, to make sure that your manuscript is as polished as possible on both a line-by-line prose level and on a major story structural level. And that's done largely by editing as much as you can on your own before hiring a professional editor, someone like me, to carry you across the finish line and be your advocate as much as the advocate for the reader and the industry professional who will be evaluating your work for publication. So next slide, please. And this is one of my favorite books, craft books toward this subject, Self-Editing for Fiction Writers. And these people have worked for decades doing contract work for publishing houses, so they get it. And that's why I bolded that part. In order to stand out from the crowd, you need to make your manuscript as sharp as possible, the emphasis on you. But now that I've kind of laid it all out heavy for you, I want to make clear that this should be fun and exhilarating. And the exhilaration begins with writing what we in the industry, is this highly technical term, call a vomit draft. And what that means is the first draft should be just getting your story out there. You can work loosely from an outline, but don't let it interrupt your flow. Don't edit yourself as you go. Just spew it all out there. And I myself am working on a novel, and being an editor, it's really hard to turn my inner editor off when I am trying to get in the flow. But I finally managed to, get my head to the point where I could just get the story out there. And what emerged was about 220,000 words of stuff that went well above and beyond what I had outlined. And so I had a tremendous self-editing challenge ahead of me. And let's move to the next slide. And that's to make clear that until it's all, you can't really edit until you've gotten it all out there. It's more sound for you to try and to cut, shape, and rewrite rather than be incomplete and then add later. So get yourself into the mindset of give yourself permission to be bad. Write first, polish later. That's the golden rule of production. And so hopefully you can get yourself there. There's and then so once you've done that vomit draft, let's move to the next slide. Then the real pick and shovel work begins, and Stephen King, who knows a thing or two about how to write a good book that sells, so I've heard, lays it all out there. Revising a story down to the bare essentials is always a little like murdering children, but it must be done. And there's a phrase we have in writing called "kill your darlings." So you have to be willing to, take a sharp critical eye to your personal flights of lyrical fancy, the emotional splatter of your vomit draft. And here's how that begins. Next slide, please. So before I get to that, I'll say, how much work it takes. The answer is it takes as much as it takes. Some people go through 3 or 4 drafts. Some people go through a dozen, like Stephen King. I've heard of authors who do 40 or 50 rewrites before they get there. And, it's just a matter of, you'll know when you know, when you just can't put any more into it and you've done as much as you can do. So let's move to the next slide. So here's step 1. This is very easy. After you've written your book, stick it in a drawer for however long it takes. You've got to get your mind off of it so you can come back to it for the editing and rewriting part with fresh eyes. With my draft, I had to ignore it for nearly 3 months and work on something else and redirect my brain so I could pick up that manuscript when it felt ready in my head to be picked up again, and look at it without feeling horror or feeling that fatigue of having written the draft in the first place. Let's move to the next slide. And here the self-editing for fiction writers, authors, just lay it out there for you. There's no better way to spot room for improvement in your manuscript than by looking at it with fresh eyes. And so you do as much as you can with your fresh eyes, and then the professional editor with their fresh eyes that will always be fresher than yours, no matter how much you keep putting that novel back in the drawer, will know how to deal with as an advocate for both you and for the reader and for the industry professional. Next slide, please. Okay, so you pull your manuscript back out of the drawer. You feel like you're ready to face this again without recoiling in horror. So ask yourself a few questions as you start your reread, to know if you've got something worth your time and investment going forward, or if maybe and there's no shame in this, if maybe this just isn't the novel or the memoir that you mean to write. Not all drafts are meant to be published. In fact, just the other night, I hosted a author event at my local bookstore with a guy named Jonathan Evison, who's a fairly well-known literary writer. And he routinely tells the story at all his book events about how he wrote 8 novels before he wrote one worth submitting and publishing. And that was his learning curve. You'll have your learning curve too. Not every first book is meant to be a first published book. So as you evaluate your manuscript, keep that in mind, but look for every opportunity to make your vomit draft investment worthwhile by the work that has to come. So follow these guidelines, and if you feel like you still got something to dig out here, then let's keep going forward, and let's go to the next slide. So here's a very empirically easy step to take. This doesn't require any creative interpretation. And I love Stephen King's quote here: if you can't get 10% out of your story while retaining the basic story and flavor, you're not trying very hard. So the idea here is look at your overall word count and commit yourself to cutting it by 10%. Almost everybody overwrites their early drafts. and that's as it should be. Like I said, get it all out there and then figure out what doesn't belong and what should go back in after you figure out what doesn't belong. And the easiest way to do that, to reread without freaking out about what works and what doesn't, is just to say, let's look for ways to take that word count down by 10%. Let's go to the next slide. So here's some ways to do that. A lot of people start with prologues and flashbacks, and I would recommend that if you don't, I would cut those for now, or at least highlight them and flag them, because almost always these overburden a story and overburden the reader from the beginning. And we're going to talk a lot more about strong beginnings in your book later on, but move on to a lot of people, and this is certainly true of me. A lot of my manuscript had a ton of giant blocks of impenetrable text that readers will not want to take on. To ensure flow, have small paragraphs, or at least digestible ones. And if you have a big block of text type of paragraph, you're going to find a lot in it that probably can be cut down. So look for opportunities to cut down anything that's more than about 12 to 15 lines of paragraph length. And then some basic craft 101 advice here. Kill your adverbs. We can talk more about showing versus telling. I didn't want to dig into that too deeply here, but it's one of those pieces of writing craft advice that it annoys people, because it gets prescribed as if it were a rule. I frame everything in terms of guidelines, not rules. But there's always a better way to emotionally engage a reader than by narrating with adverbs. That's just delivering information. It's not. It may meet you intellectually, but it's not meeting you emotionally. And your challenge at all junctures is to keep the reader's emotions engaged, whether it's memoir or a novel. Another hack I find through many of the work I see from my clients is a tendency to use a lot of superfluous dialogue tags. And by that, I mean, let's say you're writing a scene in which two people are talking and every line ends with he said, or he shouted, or she exclaimed. If it's clear who's talking, you don't need that. Those are just speed bumps that will annoy the reader. You strip those out, you will cut down your word count quite a bit. I've done that for so many clients, and I've found hundreds of instances in novels, and it's just a way of reducing the drag on your manuscript. And along those lines, there's killing superfluous dialogue itself. Another common thing I see in the work of my author clients is this tendency to write a scene that has a lot of what we call throat clearing, which is, "Hi, how are you? Oh, I'm doing great. How about you? Well, I could be better. Oh yeah? So what's going on?" And if you read professionally written novels, you will almost never see scenes like that. You start where we'll talk more about opening with disturbance, but when it comes to scene construction, the same rule applies. Cut through the throat clearing and get to the good stuff, the conflict, the disturbance. And then number 6, look for places where dialogue and narrative are redundant. Let's go to the next slide and you'll see an example of that. A very typical first-time novelist or memoirist will write a lot of scenes where they write dialogue, but they don't seem to have confidence in their dialogue, so they interpret it parallel in narrative. And the thing is, you don't need the narrative if you think your dialogue's any good. And if you don't think your dialogue's any good, then why go forward at all? So trust that your characters are announcing what you want the readers to take away, and don't feel the need to interpret for the reader, because the more you interpret for the reader, the more they will feel put at a distance from your story, because your compact with the reader is you want them to come to their own conclusions about what a character is thinking or doing or feeling. You don't want to do their work for them. By doing so, you're preventing them from having the necessary emotionally engaging experience with the work. So let's go to the next slide. Here's another great hack that a lot of authors I know swear by, is read out loud large portions of your work, especially your opening pages, and record them and play them back. And if I understand this will be painful if you hate your voice as much as I personally hate mine, but the benefit is that you will see your work in a whole new way that you wouldn't by reading it on the page. You will instantly understand where your flow isn't flowing. You will hear where you've overwritten something. You will pick up on stilted dialogue that doesn't sound anything like real people talk, and you presumably want to strive for some measure of realism. And if you find yourself being bored with what you've played back to yourself, then you have an idea of how readers and industry professionals will see it. So you will know right then where to, apply the delete key in your manuscript. So give that one a go. There's just something about something fundamentally different about the experience of engaging with the book in text versus its audio equivalent. I've taken to reading lately favorite novels and then listening to them on Audible, and I almost always get a whole new layer of nuance from a story. I engage with it in a different way. I get different takeaways. I feel even different emotions. But either way, your story has to stand up to the test of both those formats. Because, if you do get a publication contract, chances are there will be an audiobook version of it. So, it has to sound good to you before you think it can sound good to anybody else, because likely everybody else who engages with this book will feel the same way. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about writers groups. I have some ambivalence about this, and so do the self-editing for fiction writers folks. So let's go through this quote a little bit. The thing with writers groups, and I find this to be true in my own personal experience, and as well as what my author clients tell me, is that while it's good to get feedback from others as part of your self-editing process, that feedback should never substitute for the experience of editing and engaging with your own work, because often fellow writers writing and editing are not the same skill sets, and fellow writers often read your book and react to it with the mindset of the book they wish they were reading, or the book they want to read, as opposed to the book that you want it to be, or that is most likely to get published. So you will have to deal with a lot of bias from your fellow authors. I find the best way to work with a writers group, in my personal experience, is sharing your work with them a little at a time. A first chapter, get some feedback, Second chapter, they'll be familiar with the first, so they'll be able to respond to that better, and so on. That way, they're sort of following your lead and not trying to impose themselves aesthetically onto your work. But always make this part of your process. You know, if there are people you know and trust and are willing to read and critique your work honestly and not just pardon the term, blow smoke up your butt, then by all means go with that. You want affirmation when the book is ready to be published. That's when you want everybody to love you and tell you how wonderful you are. Until then, you want people who are going to be honest with you for good or for bad. If you need a good kick in the ass, then, you know, a good writers group can give that to you in a way that you may struggle to for yourself. So by all means, engage with writers groups, but don't mindlessly defer to them. And I'm going to tell a little story from my personal experience about this. About a year ago, I was hired to edit a really good memoir. It was written by a woman whose father was a Florida drug enforcement detective, and then at some point he wound up getting co-opted by the people he was chasing and turned into a drug dealer and outlaw himself. Spent a lot of time in prison, and father and daughter worked over the decades to repair the relationship before he passed. It was a terrific book, and I told her so. She hired me, but the problem is that she told me going in that her writers group told her that this book had serious structural problems because they couldn't articulate it very well. So she hired me to articulate the problems they found. The problem is I didn't find any problems in the book. It was fine as is. I had very mild notes, but she didn't believe me. We actually argued about this in an interesting way. She was insisted that the book wasn't good enough, and I insisted it was, and she wound up being very disappointed in me, and we had, you know, a not happy parting as a result, because she decided to defer her thinking to her writers group. And then months later, she came back to me and she said, you know, it turns out some people in my group felt very competitive with me. They felt intimidated by my story. And I think they were trying to undermine me a little bit and make me feel less confident in my work than I should have. And she goes, I'm sorry I took that out on you. By the way, that the happy ending there is that despite all that, the book did get an agent. I believe they are talking to publishers right now. And according to what she's told me about what her agent says, this book has a very good chance of getting a deal. So that's happening all in the headwinds of what her writers group friends tried to do to the book. So take that all with a grain of salt. By all means, I think the best use of a writers group is emotional encouragement. Writing is a very lonely endeavor, and rewriting is even lonelier. And if you have friends who help you through, you know, your darkest moments of self-doubt, who are also writers and have some built-in empathy with what you're going through, by all means, engage them for all they're worth. Just don't let their thinking become yours. Always keep your own mind about you. So let's move to the next slide.
We have a question. Sergi,
Okay,
did you
yeah.
want to unmute?
By all means.
Or do you want?
Let's take the question.
Yeah, okay.
Excuse me? Just say it again.
Yeah, did you want to ask your question?
I can just describe in general because the question I had sent, it's pretty particular. I will not tell better, but in general, basically, I'm working on a fiction book, and some of the chapters really dark. So my character is based on my experience, but I exaggerate them and dramatize them. And it's first person narrative. And sometimes when the chapter is dark and you kind of you read it through like 10, 15, 20 times. And you get I go for a walk, and you kind of mixed yourself and the character. Like it's not easy. And I just was asking, how do you differentiate yourself from your character? Because if you're believable, you have believable dialogues and descriptions, you kind of think, well, was it I? No, it wasn't me. So how do writers approach this? Especially, I know Stephen King has some dark stuff, and how do they just not going mad about this? Yeah.
Well, I think the best characters, and I've heard authors say this, are the ones who live in your head. And, you know, to them, their characters are real people who talk to them and, you know, tap them on the shoulder and tell them, hey, I'm here. You need to pay attention to me. And so I think it's actually healthy to not put too much distance between you and your character, especially if your character is modeled on you. You know, the risk there is getting so interior that the reader feels claustrophobic with the narration coming from inside your head. So my advice there, to make it palatable to both yourself and to the people you hope will read your story, is to make sure you have a good mix of narration from inside your head, the character's head, and creating scenes in which you're outside of your head and things are happening as if the reader were there, with action and dialogue and people in motion. So it's less that I think you need to have any distance from your character, as make sure that you are not giving the reader as claustrophobic an experience as you are having with your character, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and especially like close moments. For example, I try to take just very painful moments, like one of my best friends who was like in an accident, and he basically died because of the accident. But I take this moment and I twist it, but from the side it becomes a character, but still it's based on real events. And in my mind, it just takes getting used to, because how can I write about this? But then you understand that the character is a different person. But only this situation can allow you the details that you otherwise will never.
I would not shy from that darkness, because to me, what you're describing sounds very emotionally engaging, and that's the experience you want your reader to have. You want to grab their emotions, you want to make them feel what you're feeling, and so that's never a bad thing. But you know, it's possible to go too dark and too interior, and you just have to, you know, trust your reaction to that material after you've taken you've taken that walk and stepped away from it a bit. You'll see your work with clearer eyes. And if you feel like it's too dark even for you, then trust that the reader might have that same experience as well. And try and, you know, find ways to minimize the darkness, or get through the darkness so it's not pages and pages and pages and pages of it that the reader feels assaulted with. I hope that makes some sense.
But I guess it's just the writer's job. You have to tell the truth.
Absolutely.
Perspective. So you have to do it and get used to it, to learn to separate the character.
Yeah. But again, you know, that's what you do with your first draft, and then the second and subsequent drafts are, you find the best story out of that first draft that you possibly have, and also consider how other people will receive it. You have to be true to yourself, but if you want an audience, you have to meet them where they're at as well, without compromising your truth or your artistry. It's a fine line, but you know, the first draft is you thinking for yourself. The subsequent drafts are you thinking for yourself and the reader, and meeting each other in the middle.
Thanks, Sergey. We have some other questions from
Let's take some more. Rhoda, go ahead.
Hi, Jim. Thank you and thank you, Scarlett. So my question is about sharing with a group. You mentioned sharing a chapter at a time.
Yeah.
And my immediate thought is, well, but that's a chapter and the rest of the context is gone, right? So can you talk a little bit more about goals that a writer can think about as they're crafting a chapter, and then kind of what I might be hoping to get from a group? Like, is the chapter stand alone, or, you know, just I'm gonna stop there.
Well, what I'm describing is, you know, an experience in which you start your writers group friends off with your very first chapter. So they come in on the ground floor of your story. So subsequent chapters, they're in, you know, they're in on everything that preceded that. So they're reading the story in a way like a reader would. And the risk there is that they will raise a lot of questions about stories and things that you intend to address in later chapters. So I think you want to present individual chapters to your writers group with the idea, and you can frame this to them. Say, does this, do you feel oriented in what's happening? Do you feel like you understand where and why and how people are doing and thinking and feeling what they are? And B, are you having a satisfying emotional experience with this? I think those are the things that are most important to get from a writer's group, because they're sort of a stand-in for the readers you hope will buy your book down the road. So I think it's less about making sure that everything's perfect than making sure that people will always want to read the next chapter, and to shape each chapter so you always leave your writing group people wanting more, and not just seeing it as, you know, a chore they have to undergo, because so you'll read their work and give them the same kind of feedback. Let's take another question.
Thank you.
Ivana, yes.
I'm so patient, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, got it. So I'm a visual artist, and I talk a lot about my history and my culture through my artwork, and that has led to a lot of artist talks that I've done, talking about the history and the culture of my heritage, which is Pakistan and India. And slowly I've started to open up about my background, which people have found interesting. So they like to hear the geography and the history. So I'm writing a memoir, nonfiction, more about my past, and I want to create, the end goal with this writing is to raise awareness of forced marriages, because I'm the survivor of that, and to raise hope for other humans and women around the world. So that's my end goal. And I realize with what I'm talking about, it's important to talk about facts.
Yes.
And culture and history. How much of that do I put that in a book? What's the general guideline? I don't want to bore people to death and give a history lesson.
Well, I think you want to strive for something close to a 50-50 balance between that context, that history and culture that you render in narrative, and make sure that anytime there's more than several paragraphs of that, you break it up with a recreated scene from your own life, full of action and motion and dialogue. So people are, you know, not only do they have a break from the narration, but they're having an elevated emotional experience with your story. And honestly, your story sounds incredibly emotionally compelling just from what you've told me. And I can't imagine, you know, a scene in which, you know, you and your husband arguing or fighting, or him being abusive, recreated as best as you can according to fact, would not be incredibly grabbing. And I'll a little sidebar on how that works in memoir. You don't have to be legally, or you don't have to you don't have to achieve a standard of legal or journalistic accuracy when you recreate a scene from your life from a memoir. You just have to honor the truth of a thing. If you can't remember exactly what people said, you just have to render it in a way that is true to the character of the people involved. that is very acceptable in memoir. It doesn't have to be, you know, like a tape recording of what happened. So I hope that puts you at ease about that. But again, strive for that balance between narration and emotionally engaging scenes.
And
And
how
I
do
think-
I incorporate the stories of other women that I've known throughout my life? How do I put those stories into my memoir?
Well, I think the same way. If you're talking to these people and telling their stories, again, do your best to recreate the scenes that made you want to tell their stories in the first place. You know, get from them as much. Are these people are you interviewing them, or are you?
They're people that I know from memories.
Okay.
One's deceased, but then there's people close to me that I'm still talking to and getting out as much as I can, because a lot of these women have blocked a lot of things out.
Well, I'd say take everything you know and use the validity of artistic license to you know, it's like Sergey was saying. You know, there's some exaggeration for dramatic effect, and you are allowed to do that in a memoir. You don't. You're trying to create an emotionally compelling experience for the reader that is true to the facts, and you know, how would I put this? There's a balance between telling the truth and being accurate and using dramatically elevated license, if that makes any sense.
Do you mean like creating dialogue? I was thinking like she could use dialogue even like when from her own memory, from them telling story. So you could tell the story from what you remember them.
Yeah. And you can also
dialogue.
Yeah, and that same dialogue can be used to deliver information and context and history. You know, the challenge there is to make sure it doesn't sound like, you know, someone reading a Wikipedia page out loud. But dialogue is you know, especially when two people disagree on what a fact is a great way to deliver contextual information about culture and history. And you can skillfully recreate, you can skillfully create scenes in which you imagine characters, people you've known or heard about, who are having a discussion about these things to you know, express those ideas in a very reader-friendly, dynamic way.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Piggyback on that, because I have a question about dialogue.
Yeah.
How can we create better dialogue that sounds like real people talking without any of the throat clearing? Like what are some tips? And also, how do we make it not sound like us? Like if you're recreating or remembering dialogue, what are some tips to create dialogue that isn't dull and doesn't necessarily sound like the writer?
Wow. Well, first of all, don't say I would say that you can there's no better dialogue in any narrative work or any narrative driven work than people arguing about what the facts or the truth of a situation are. And you can deliver a great deal of information by having people argue. And I think it's an easy challenge for a writer, once you feel the emotions of the people arguing, to write dialogue that is true to that conflict. And I've worked with some very, you know, with some writers who are working to develop their skills, who write great dialogue because they have tapped into that pure vein of emotion and rendered it in argumentative form. And readers love people in conflict. So use dialogue to create and intensify conflict. have people argue and unpack information along the way, and you will keep your readers as you go. All right, any more questions at this point?
Jim, I would like to ask, just is there such a way, because when I'm writing the novel, I use this approach. I record, I take the first thought that comes to my mind, I record the chapter, and basically then I take the scene as it comes to my mind as a first thought. And I built like 70 scenes, and then I pull them together like a jigsaw puzzle. Is there such a way, like officially, or it's just had been invented by me?
I think you have to trust your instincts. And then if you're still not sure about it, that's when you turn it over to other people, trusted readers who will give you a straight opinion. And that's actually a lot of what the editor you wind up hiring will do for you, is to say, okay, this scene goes on a little too long. This narration is a little too heavy-handed and doesn't really support the scene very well. That's a lot of what I do, is tell people when you're out of balance or between those two elements, and suggest workarounds for that, and give you new ways of looking at the same material. Because to repeat, self-editing is something you need to do, but you can only go so far with it before you can't see your own work straight or objectively anymore, or you're so thoroughly fatigued by it that you need somebody else's professional fresh eyes.
But I guess it's like filmmakers, yes, they do it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
Sorry.
collaborative endeavor. Nobody ever made a good film one-handed. It takes a small consensus of professional viewpoints to bring out the best, most coherent, most truthful version of your story. The professional editor will do that for you, and if you get a literary agent, they will further do that for you, albeit through the lens of its commercial potential, as opposed to the best story can be on its own merits. And same with the publishing house professional. If you're lucky enough to get a publisher, they're going to take their own, they're going to have their own notes for you in that regard. And through all that, you will find that if 5 people feel roughly the same way about my material, then maybe they're seeing things in a way that I can't quite. And by compromising all those viewpoints and bringing them together, you've achieved a workable synthesis for going forward.
Okay, thank you. We only have about 45 minutes, Sergi. So if you do need to contact Jim later, he has kindly put his contact information into the.
Yeah.
And so
I would be happy to talk further with you.
That Shabana has another question. I'm
Okay.
curious
how
and if the other stories you're collecting from other women were, this is from Rhoda. Sorry.
Shabana about what she's, I'm like, I'll just say it. So I know you're collecting stories like after the fact of making your decision, but as a divorced woman, there were lots of women's stories that influenced my decision to stay married, as well as those that finally emboldened me to file for divorce and go through that whole process. And so I made up that you were like asking about ways to fold those back into your memoir. And so the question is like, are the stories that you're collecting now, if you were to have had them when you were married, would they have changed things or not, as a way to like weave those things back in? Because I think those other women's stories are valuable as well.
That's an interesting question. If you guys wouldn't mind putting your contact information into the chat, I always encourage creatives to connect together as much as possible. If you're not comfortable with that, I completely understand, but you guys would be awesome to make that connection. And Shabana is a recent fellowship recipient also in visual arts, and is extremely, just a passionate, wonderful person who's very talented. And also Rhoda is an educator and a phenomenal I had coffee with her for like 3 hours. I feel like it's a girl date. Anyway,
Wow.
but if you were,
and frankly, just
we
the
only,
way you describe it sounds incredibly compelling. So I really hope your books make it to the finish line out in the world and out in the bookstores, because that's exactly the sort of stuff I love to read and learn from.
well, thank you.
And sorry, I've got a kitty butt in my face.
Okay, I'm gonna enlarge the screen again and
Okay,
let
let's
Jim
move on to the
continue.
next slide.
Oops.
Okay, so let's say you've done all this work that I've talked about so far, and you're still struggling to identify the center of your story, that, you know, to figure out if you've got something worth fully investing yourself in. And I've personally found a really good cheat code for this. As far as I know, I'm the one who came up with this. I myself was struggling with my own novel. You know, I'd written this big vomitous mess, so totally overwritten, got onto all sorts of sidetracks. And I remember after I stuck the manuscript in a drawer and pulled it out again after about 3 months, I was rereading it and I was thinking, okay, you know, this is a little different than the story I started out telling. And let me move Reggie here. Sorry, my cat distracted me. And I was still trying to figure out what my story was. So kind of in desperation, I sat down and wrote out the shortest possible synopsis of it. And let's go to the next slide and I'll show you what I did with my own novel. So the novel's called Everybody Had a Hard Year. And 25 words is what they call in the industry an elevator pitch. You know, the idea being you're trapped in an elevator with a literary agent. You've got, you know, 15 seconds to convey your idea to them and hopefully sell them on it. So I wrote this synopsis. This is exactly 25 words. And that helped me kind of like, okay, this is the story I wanted to tell, but you know, does it hold water? So I moved on to the 50-word version on the next slide. And between 25 and 50 words, I understood my character better. I understood my setting better. I understood my central conflict better. So I just, you know, I was kind of exhilarated by this discovery. So I went on to 100 words on the next slide. And somewhere around here, I realized, okay, here's the story I wanted to tell. I understand in my manuscript how I lost sight of that. And now I can begin, now that I know my center, I can work from the center out and trust that the center will hold. So I wound up doing this up to somewhere around 2,000 words. I found that I had left off with synopsis and summary and had just started rewriting the novel organically because my head was bursting with all these new ideas now that I understood my center. So that is a good way of, you know, if you're feeling like you're not sure what the story is, or if the story you meant to tell matches what you've written so far, this is a good way to zero in on it. So I would say start out with 25 words and just keep doubling till you feel like you've locked in and are ready to start the rewrite based on your new understanding of what your story is. So let's go to the next slide. I meant to take that one out, sorry. But as always, questions are infinitely welcome. So at this point, I'm going to talk about beginnings because it's very hard to rewrite a novel or a memoir if you have this nagging feeling that your beginning isn't working, your first pages, because those are the ones a literary agent is going to evaluate your whole manuscript on. Same with the publishing house editor. So you want those first pages to be represent you and your story at your best. And so let's go to the next slide. So we're going to talk about what makes story beginnings go sideways based on my experience with the authors I've edited. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so there are 5 problems with soft beginnings that I've identified. And the first one is, I call it "Where's the Fire?" And the problem is a failure to establish an emotionally engaging disturbance in your main character's world. So let's explore that further on the next slide. So in this section of the presentation, I'm going to quote heavily from a writing craft guru named James Scott Bell, who has written several books on various aspects of craft, including revision and self-editing. And what I like about him is he's not big on psychology and theory. He just digs right into the nuts and bolts. He tells it to you straight, sometimes smacks you across the face a little harder than you would like, but it's all for your own good. And he lays it out straight here. When you're trying to get somebody, an industry professional, interested in your book, know that there are a zillion manuscripts out there competing for their attention, and they are just looking for an excuse to say no to you so they can move on to the next one. Do not give them that excuse. Open with a disturbance and conflict. And I'm going to illustrate this on a coming slide here. So let's go to the next one. So Bell expands on this a little bit. Everything you do in those first pages has to be about establishing and building on emotionally engaging the reader by, creating some deep turmoil in your main character's world. And, based on the stories I hear you tell so far, you're going to have no problem in that regard. It's just, you have the story. It's just a matter of how you render it. So let's go to the next slide. In its simplest form, here's the difference. There's a famous spy novelist named John Le Carre who came up with this example. He often says, "The cat sat on the mat" is not a story. The cat sat on the dog's mat. Now that's a story, because immediately there's a disturbance or the portent of one. And at that point, you got to know, well, so what happened between the cat and the dog? And at that point, you've created a hook that keeps the reader going. And same with this next example. I looked out my bedroom window, I'm sorry, go back to the previous slide. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a car pull into the driveway. Now that doesn't really hook you, but I looked out my bedroom window and saw a police cruiser pull into the driveway. Immediately, you want to know, me as the reader, I want to know what that's all about. And I'm going to keep reading until I find out. And if it takes me the whole book to find out, I'm in. It can be as simple as that. So the next slide is an example of the best opening that illustrates my point about establishing conflict. So I'm going to read this one out loud because it is so perfect. Is anybody familiar with the author Anne Lamott? She is just a top-tier literary author. Anyway, this one goes, "The world outside the window was in flames. The leaves on the pistachio trees shone fire red and orange. Maddie studied the early morning light. She was lying on the side of the bed where her husband should have been sleeping." So Anne Lamott gets to have it all ways here. She gets to have the lyrical, poetic opening. And I imagine a lot of you write because you have a style and a voice that you feel has some appeal. And so that shows here. We've established a character and we know a little bit about her. And now we know that there's a major disturbance in her life, and we are in at this point. That's really all it takes to hook a reader, and you don't have to. This proves that you do not have to open with a lot of throat clearing, with a lot of setup. Let's go to the next slide. Disturbances are everywhere, and it's good for you to get in the habit of thinking about how to introduce a disturbance in motion to your character's world, because that's what readers are there for. And I, off the top of my head, just the other day when I was putting together the slide, I decided, let's challenge myself to think of, everyday disturbances to a world that could portend something deeper and darker that I'm interested in. So I came up with a folded note on the refrigerator you found in the morning that wasn't there when you went to bed. Phone calls to a loved one that aren't returned. You find a strange package on your front porch. There's a closed door meeting at your work that should include you, but for some reason doesn't. You get a message from someone you had an affair with a decade before who suddenly wants back in your life, or so it seems. The same car has been behind you for the last 4 turns you've made. Don't you want to know what that's all about? And here's one from my real life. And I see I missed the N in one. So that proves the universal rule that even editors need editors. So about 5 years ago, I was sitting in a bar having a drink, and I realized that the guy on the stool next to me was the same guy who bullied me all through junior high school over 30 years before. And I remember looking at him and realizing, hey, I'm bigger than this guy now. Let's have a little fun with that. And I won't tell you what happened, but I hope you'll want to know what happened, because it actually turned out to be pretty interesting. So that's all it takes is, think in terms of how you can disturb the placid existence of a character and deepen and darken it at every turn. That's what readers want, and that's kind of your burden to deliver to them. And if you have a great disturbing story to begin with, then you're halfway there. Let's move on to the next slide. So I'm not going to read this whole thing, but kind of bookmark it and read it later if you'd like. This is an example of good writing that establishes a character and does, there's some color to it. There's a lot of voice. The one thing there isn't in all this is why I should care about this person. There's no disturbance to her world. And as a reader, as any reader, they're not going to put up with a whole lot of that. You can't, this is what we call throat clearing. You can't just, think that you can have a lot of establishment and setup before you get to the conflict. In this world, readers will not put up with that. The classic novels of the canon, the ones that were published 30, 40, 50 years ago or more, they weren't competing with TV and video games and social media and everything else for your attention. They could afford to have the leisurely rollout. You, in 2023, unfortunately, no matter how morally compelling or intellectually rigorous your story, you still have to go for the emotional throat, or you're just not going to have a readership. So let's move on. And emotional engagement has to include high stakes. Before I get into this, I will tell you a little story about someone who hired me or wanted to hire me to edit her memoir. And I ultimately wound up not going forward with her because we sat down and talked about what her story was. And her story, as she initially told it to me, was, I got divorced and I moved to Australia to start a sheep farming ranch. And I said, okay, so was it a contentious divorce? No, we're still friends. Did
disaster happen during, after you moved to Australia? Did your life change in some major transformative way? Well, not really. I mean, I get up and do my sheep thing, and then I go to bed, and I made some friends, and it just turned out there wasn't, it was a wonderfully affirming story in her eyes, but as a reader, I couldn't find anything to hook onto, because frankly, we want to read about characters who go through hell to get to heaven, and there wasn't any hell there, and as a result, the heaven was pretty boring, to be honest. And I kept trying to draw out reader-friendly conflict in her story, and she either didn't have it or couldn't articulate it to me. And I finally had to say, you're a wonderful person, but I don't think I can work with you, because I can't knowingly work on a book that I think doesn't really have a chance. And the story just lacks the requisite elements of emotional engagement, because there were really no high stakes. So Donald Moss, who wrote this great book called Writing the Breakout Novel, he's a literary agent he's been that for about 40 years, and he's worked on some of the bigger fictional blockbusters in American literature over that time. And he distills the wisdom that I've been trying to convey very haltingly throughout, which is, if a premise has gut emotional appeal, the novel will start to write itself in my mind. The very idea invites me to imagine characters, complications, and dramatic climaxes. And that's what we're getting at here, is get you to a jumping off point where you're off to the races, and you're keeping that emotional engagement in mind while being truest to your own story. So it's next slide here. So let me explain what I mean by high stakes. And the simple way to put it is that you or your lead character must be at risk of death. And there's more than one kind of death here. There's physical death, which can be anything from a medical condition or a serial killer on the loose, or maybe there's a prospective killer who lives in your own house, or a looming large-scale catastrophe, either a natural or climate one, or something driven by tech or mad science. There's all sorts of ways to have the looming portent or threat of physical death hanging over a character. So, if that's the kind of high stakes you're looking at, that's one way to develop it. And attendant with that is psychological death, which is just as horrible as physical death. It just it's the death where you die inside, and yet the shell of you continues on, which I think is even worse than physical death. And there's any number of ways to exploit that. A longtime aspiration of yours may prove to be forever out of reach, and therefore a dream dies. A loved one may be gaslighting you, or a stranger won't stop harassing you. Something you believed in, that was something you believed for a long time was real, may prove to be an illusion. Oh my God, you mean he wasn't my father? That sort of thing. So psychological death is every bit as good as physical death when it comes to establishing high stakes. And then there's also professional death, which some people would rank as even worse than physical or psychological death, because for a lot of people, their professional identity is their personal identity. And characters who feel that way make for some of the greatest characters in both memoir and fiction. So it could be as simple as you make a terrible mistake at work, or you're blamed for one. You have a workplace rival bent on taking your job, or a stranger may be bent on discrediting you, which is a common story in this internet first world, in which if you say something that hits somebody the wrong way on Twitter or Facebook, suddenly people you don't even know are flaming you and threatening you with death, and
calling your work and telling them to fire you, especially, right now in the midst of people trying to find safe ground to stand on when it comes to where they stand with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It seems like any stance you take is going to piss somebody off, and those people want to punish you. So that's another way of looking at making sure you have high stakes. It's just an absolute necessity, however you render it. So let's move on to the next slide. This is me being a little facetious, but my favorite childhood book of all time is from the show Sesame Street, and it's called The Monster at the End of This Book. And it's only about 20 pages long, and it's got maybe 200 total words in it, but it is a perfect distillation of the threat of death. And I'm exaggerating here for comedic purposes, but the story basically is Grover, the monster from Sesame Street, is told that there's a monster at the end of the book as we open it, and he's terrified because it's like, oh my gosh, I'm scared of monsters. Monsters are awful. And so he does everything he can to keep the book from ending, including like building a brick wall on a page and tying it up in ropes. And then at the very end, 20 pages in, he realizes he's the monster, and there's nothing to worry about. And sorry for the spoiler if you haven't read it. But anyway, let's move on from that. Now, probably the biggest problem I run into with bad beginnings is, as I touched on before, this need to feel like you have to explain the story before you tell the story. Nobody has any patience for that. Readers won't tolerate it. Agents don't want to look at it. Publishing houses won't touch it. So if you feel like you have to explain things before you can start things, your story doesn't start in the right place, and you're going to have to completely revisit where you begun. Now, the way to work around that is, unpack exposition, which is, narration that's designed to convey information. By repackaging it in scenes of dramatic conflict. As I said before, I think there's no scene more dynamic than two people who disagree on the basic truth or facts about something and argue about it and unpack it as they go. That is a reader-friendly hook every time out. So look for ways to convert your narration into dynamic scene construction. And James Scott Bell, who is the author of this quote, his books, which I will recommend at the end, really help you dig deeper into the mechanics of good scene construction. And I highly recommend his books to you. So let's go to the next slide for now. Now, attendant with this, here's why you need to avoid exposition at the beginning, explaining things. Readers will wait a long time for exposition. What grabs them is a character in motion and something that is stirring the placid waters of their existence. I call this the opening disturbance, which is, I should have taken out that extra part. For now, memorize this rule: act first, explain later. You will never go wrong delaying exposition. So if you need to explain a lot of stuff, you do it through argumentative dialogue. You can marble in a little narration at a time in the midst of that scene, but never overburden your storytelling with too much putting the story on pause to explain things. You got to keep readers on the hook with conflict. Let's move on. So here's a few what I call hacksposition of ways to get around the expositional hurdles. And as I said, turn those narrative passages in your early pages into scenes full of action, dialogue, and story motion. And again, turning the unpacking of facts into an argument is never not a winning way to keep readers on the hook and to convey crucial information. And as I said, break up those narrative passages and marble the information in them a little into a time in and around dialogue. You want to avoid what we call in the business the info dump, which is just a big block of fact and context that just sits there and takes the reader's attention away from your characters. So a big part of why expositional dumps happen is because you want writers, especially in first drafts, are learning about their own characters as they go. So they tend to include everything about a character in a story, even if it doesn't necessarily belong on the page by the time you get to a final draft and the point where you're hiring an editor. What you should do is in subsequent drafts is take out all that character and place and history and background information and put those into separate documents outside the novel or the memoir and put them into what we call character sketches, in which you just sit there and free write about your character, everything about them, whether it's relevant or not. Talk about their childhood, talk about their relationship with their parents, talk about their favorite candy, whether they play sports or play an instrument or pursue some other kind of art. Talk about the kind of crowd they hung out with in high school and talk about their early romantic relationships. You will wind up using very little of this in your novel, but it will serve your novel because you will know automatically, you will know your character that much better, and therefore you will have a better developed instinct for what belongs on the page as opposed to what should stay in your head. So next slide, please. The folks who wrote Self-Editing for Fiction Writers, another book I'm going to highly recommend. This touches again on the subject of showing versus telling. If you're just talking, if you're just saying, okay, so and so was born here, raised here. Here are all their biographical markers. That's not dynamic. There's no tension, no conflict in there. So keep that in your sketch, so you know in your head what belongs and what doesn't. And so this bolded passage, I think, is crucial. Once you understand a character well enough to bring him or her to life, we don't have to know where the character came from. So let's move on from there. Now, another problem that kind of ties into this is what James Scott Bell calls happy people in happy land, which, and I'll unpack this quote here. Many times an author lays out a scene of domestic bliss or perfect harmony, thinking that the readers will get to like the characters involved. Then when the trouble starts, they'll be hooked in with these nice folks and be oh so worried about them. But the opposite is usually true, because as the reader, you're wondering, why do I care? Life is good. These people can get along just fine without me. They clearly don't need me to be emotionally invested in them because you've given me nothing to emotionally invest in. I showed you that example earlier of the car pulling in the driveway versus the sheriff's cruiser pulling in the driveway. That came from the beginning of an author I worked with several years ago, who opened the book with that line, I saw a car pull in the driveway. And then she went on for like 5 pages about getting out of bed and looking at herself in the mirror and pulling on a bathrobe and shuffling downstairs and making her kids breakfast and, thinking about how beautiful her house was. And only then did we find out that there was a big disturbance in her life. But at that point, I didn't care anymore because, this person was boring to me. She just lay flat on the page. So the way to get your your readers to love your characters is not to protect them. Don't be too protective of them. Make them go through hell to get to a happy ending, hopefully in the end, that they will have deserved, and the reader will have deserved it along with them. So let's click forward. And I wanted to repeat this opening from Anne Lamott, because she hints at happy people in happy land. The way she opens implies a person, you know, at peace and in harmony with their world, and then boom, she takes it all away from them. And so that's how you can get from 0 to 60 in, you know, 2 seconds rather than 10 pages. Let's move on. And the last big problem with openings that don't work are what James Scott Bell calls the lure of the lyrical. And I'll tell you another story about another client of mine. This guy wrote beautiful prose, and he opened his novel with several pages about an old man riding on a horse through some rugged country in the Western US. And the descriptions were very rich. It was all, you know, the bunch grass and the cheatgrass and the hillocks and the hummocks and the canyons and the ravines and the hollows and the draws. And he had such an authoritative sense of place, but that's all there was. You know, we had no sense that there was anything wrong with him or about to be wrong with him. And at a certain point, I found myself, you know, losing interest despite this beautiful prose, because beautiful prose in and of itself is just not enough to hook you. So in this case, because there wound up being a fair amount of murder in the story, I suggested that he take that same opening about riding his horse through the rugged country, and showing it as somebody viewing him doing that through a sniper scope held by another. He was a little resistant about that because he was very protective of his lyrical prose, but he saw the need to give the reader something besides, you know, the exercise of his own ego through, you know, his beautiful lyrical voice. So by all means, write beautiful prose, but make sure it always serves the story. And that's the big takeaway here from James Scott Bell. Let's move on. So we're getting near the end here, and I want to, before I get into what we've got at the end here, I want to see if anybody else has questions they want to bring up about anything we've covered so far, or maybe not have covered.
I have a question. I would
Yeah.
like to ask you. I was wondering how many times the authors like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling, for example, read their books while editing and writing before it sees the light, like 10 times, 100 times, and it's just...
I know the answer is different for every author. One thing that came out, I mentioned that just 2 nights ago, I was doing a Q&A with this author, Jonathan Evison, and he's pretty prolific. He's written 20 books, only half of which have been published, as I mentioned, because the others were not quite good enough. And he puts his books through a lot of rigor. He will rewrite and rewrite and rewrite as a way of being absolutely confident about every sentence, every page. And he mentioned that this new novel, the one we were discussing the other night, it actually happened to be reviewed in both the New York Times and the Washington Post that same day. And he said he had a feeling this one was going to get a lot of attention, so he put extra care into it. And he mentioned that he did something like 23 complete rewrites before he sent it off to his agent to look at. So that's one, I think, fairly extreme example. The last author I worked with, we've gone through 6 rounds of me making suggestions about the substance and structure of his story, and him implementing them and sending them back to me, and me giving him further notes. Those aren't complete rewrites, but they represent top to bottom rounds of reading through the manuscript line by line and trying to root out deficiencies and implausibilities. So I would say somewhere in the midpoint between 6 and 23 is probably where a lot of authors land based on what they've told me and what I've read about them and heard. But the bottom line is just however many it takes for you to feel like, yeah, I nailed it.
That's interesting. And if you go like through the whole book or chapter by chapter, because you can focus on chapter until it's done, or you can go a few times through the whole circle, or it's always about combination of both.
I would say that most people feel the need to go through the whole thing because they have to have a feeling, they have to believe in the idea that the whole thing hangs together. Chapters do not exist by themselves in a vacuum. They are, just arbitrary signposts for the reader's benefit. And I wouldn't put a whole lot of stock in a chapter as a singular creative unit. It all has to serve the whole of the book. So I think most authors, when they talk about this, are talking about top to bottom revision and rewriting that encompasses the whole of the book.
Yeah. And eventually when they go through many times, some of the chapters will be more ready than the others, and they will be skipping them, just going to the places that needs particular
right
work.
Yeah the book I'm currently editing right now has a great first about 60 pages, and then it starts to lose its center. And so I wound up giving a lot of notes between about pages 60 and 120, and then suddenly you kind of found the handle again a little bit. So my notes were kind of spotty throughout, but it was really one section of the book that needed extra attention, these 50 to 60 pages that represented his second act. The rest of it was pretty well fine. We just had to James Bell Scott refers to this often. He calls it the muddle in the middle. That'll, most books have to have a classic 3-act structure, and everybody struggles with second acts because, it's the point. It's the stuff between establishing the main challenge or the main problem and resolving it in the third act. You have to realize that second acts are the bridge between those two things, but you can't just let things lay flat and not be in motion. And that is my current client's problem, but it was an easy one to root out and work around. And as the editor he hired, he couldn't see that for himself. I had to find it for him. And that's part of why you hire a professional editor, because they can see your work in a way that may not be so clear to you anymore.
Thank you.
Okay. So wrapping up here, here's
Rhoda has a question. Sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rhoda.
No worries. It was just I wanted to hear your thoughts about seeking out a publisher versus self-publishing. What your personal opinion is.
Well, I guess it depends on what your goals are. I mean, if your goal is to be read by a wide readership and to have some critical validation and to be reviewed in major outlets and to go on bookstore tours, you pretty much need a publishing house behind you. Self-publishing is valid. I work with a lot of self-publishing authors. The ones who succeed know who their audience is. They write what I call hard genre stories. Like one of my clients writes, vampire erotica, but she knows how to find the audience for those books online. So therefore she can market directly to them and make money off them. But if you're writing, so I would say self-publishing works if you know, if you're committing yourself to doing all the work, not just the writing and the publishing, but the marketing and promotion and distribution. It helps to know who your audience is and to know how to reach them through online channels or elsewhere. And to have a really, really good idea of who it is who is interested in your book. When you write hard genre, that's easier to do than if you write a very highly personal memoir, or what they call literary fiction that isn't necessarily tethered to a genre. So I guess in your case, I would ask yourself, do you know how to find your readers? If you do, then self-publishing can work for you because you can market directly to them through your online research.
So the things that I'm thinking about are educational resources, specifically math help stuffs. So I've been going back and forth about what's the best approach to take those things.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think there's merits in both to both approaches. I guess it comes down to this: if you are knocking on the door of the publishing industrial complex and not getting immediately anywhere, or you're frustrated with the delays that are kind of built into the system, then by all means take it on yourself. And like I said, if you have half an idea of how to reach the people you want to reach, then you'll almost certainly have a more satisfying and much more timely experience than you would waiting for the publishing machinery to do its work, which can be a little bit like, trying, have the Titanic trying to turn around in the face of an iceberg. So I guess it depends on how long, not just who you want to reach, but how long you're willing to, how soon you want this to happen.
I just want to tell you that's the best answer I've gotten to that question thus far, because you really gave me the things to consider, pros and cons about the choices. So thank you.
Yeah. I don't have any snobbery about, self-publishing is for, people whose work isn't good enough to get regularly published. I know that's not true. I work with so many clients who just know their audience, they know how to reach them, and they're figure well, why do I have to, cede 90% of my royalties to a publishing house when I know how to market directly to the people I want to reach? And if they hire me to edit it and give it a professional polish, then hopefully it's every bit as good as a major New York publisher's work would be. And at that point, what's the difference? So
Sergi has one more question.
Yes.
What do you think is the best way to cohesively connect all the chapters of your novel? I think we're talking about transition here. So he's looking for advice for how to make sure that your whole novel is cohesive, but it has a transition between each chapter.
Yeah. Well, the best technique I know of is the cliffhanger technique at the end of the chapter. Every story should should raise a question in the early pages and then push that unanswered question forward. And so if every chapter ends with something that raises an unanswered question to be addressed in the next chapter, then the reader will follow right along because they got to know that answer. So this wasn't part of my talk, but James Scott Bell in his books especially, and let's click back one slide.
Oh, oops.
Okay, so these three books, Conflict and Suspense, Plot and Structure, and Revision and Self-Editing by James Scott Bell, dig a lot into the structure of chapters as a seamless transition device to keep readers on the hook. And he will dig into the mechanics of how cliffhangers at the end of chapters work to keep readers on the hook. You always, it's just always leave something unaddressed going immediately forward, and you can't go wrong.
But it can be done like in an untraditional way, not just in the end of the chapter, but suddenly at certain point of the novel. And not logically, but some spontaneously, I guess.
I'm sorry. Can you explain that?
I mean,
I'm sorry,
like,
Sergey. Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're gonna have to connect with Jim later.
Okay,
I have other
okay, I
people
understand.
in the
Okay.
workshop, and they
Yeah,
need to ask some questions.
Feel free to
We
email
only
me.
have about 5 minutes left,
That's okay.
so
Yeah, I
I welcome
understand
you to
completely.
connect with Jim later. Shabana?
Yeah. Shabana?
Okay, you have some PowerPoint slides about characters, like the risk of death, psychological death, which is really, really useful. Do you have some kind of chart or more notes that I could work off of to build on my writing?
I don't personally, but part of the reason I brought up these James Scott Bell books is that they're easy to find in those books, and he digs into them with a minimum of preamble and gives you like real immediate stuff to work with in that regard.
The books are...
Yeah, there's only so much I could cover in 2 hours, but he really gives you a lot of in-depth material about how to know what about a character belongs in a book versus what should stay in a sketch, and how to draw a sketch so you know the difference between those two intimately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so I recommend these books, and let's go back to the next slide. And if you're writing memoir, I happen to have a really good friend who's a well-regarded memoirist. Her name is Claire Dieter, and I asked her for her recommendations for memoir writers in terms of craft and inspiration. And she suggested Body Work by Melissa Febos and Writing is My Drink by Theo Nestor. And on my own, I found something a little more dedicated to, nuts and bolts and self-editing, called How to Write and Edit and Publish Your Memoir. That I read several pages, that not the whole thing. And it seems like it's got it works more like the Bell books in terms of just practical nuts and bolts as opposed to theory, when it comes to sorting out the mechanics of your memoir writing. And then for a good overview on what makes great dynamic storytelling in the eyes of readers and publishers, you can't beat Donald Moss's Writing the Breakout novel. He just lays it all out for you, tells you what works, what doesn't, what sells, what flops, and how to adapt yourself to those realities. So let's go one more slide down. And when you do your nuts and bolts self-editing, you're going to want to have a handful of resources by your side. And here are the ones I deem to be absolutely essential. Almost all the publishers I work with see the Merriam-Webster dictionary as the industry standard. Those are the ones you should get your correct spellings, your preferred spellings, your sense of whether a word is appropriate to its time and place. That's an unbeatable resource in that regard. There's now, if you're writing journalism or writing a grant, Scarlett, am I correct in assuming that the AP style book is the Bible for that, or is it more of a Chicago thing?
Well, I would say that you pick one and then stick with it. Like,
Right.
don't switch your styles in between. If that's the one that you're going for, just be consistent is the #1 goal. Most reviewers are very I don't think that they're like, oh, that's not AP style. So there's not, and we're moving a lot away from, it still matters if you are a literary person and you're applying for a literature grant, if you have a lot of typos and misspellings and you're switching in between style. But I think we're, for the most part, most organizations are moving away from, making sure that you're to the book and have all of your everything correct in your grammar. I still recommend you definitely have someone look at it or go through it. But unless you're doing news releases, magazine writing, newspaper writing, you won't necessarily have to do AP style to the letter, which is great. Never did figure out midnight.
The benefit of a style guide, whichever one you use, is that it helps you stay consistent. And a lot of what I do in manuscripts is clean up inconsistencies, like people who spell out numbers in some instances when they should be using the numerals. And it's my job to impose consistency on them and use the style guide as sort of my baseline reference for that. So we're at the end, and so I want to thank you for your time. And if you want to stay in touch and ask me further questions, I'm happy to do that. You see my email there. I have a website. I have not done the best job of keeping it up to date, but it has the basics. And if you want to follow me on social media, I will say that Twitter is such a diarrhea rodeo these days that I'm hardly there. Facebook is probably where I spend the most time, and I'm kind of intrigued by the potential of Threads. And I like to take a lot of what I call film noir photos, so I have a pretty robust Instagram presence. So follow me, find me, reach out to me, and I'm very grateful for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim, for being here. If you would like to download the chat, that is something that you can do. Go to the chat function, and beside the smiley face is 3 dots. When you click on that, you can save the chat, and that way you can have everybody's contact that they dropped in or questions that were answered online via the chat. Thank you so much for being. I will send this recording out to everybody who's registered, and you can rewatch it if you want. I also dropped it in here. So
and the slide deck is available to everybody, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you again for your time. I hope I gave you some new things to think about and some things you can immediately.
I took notes, a lot of notes. I took
me too.
Good. Yeah. So, well, great.
Thank you so much. You guys have a wonderful Thursday.
Great. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much, and have an inspiring week. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Scarlett.
Bye. All right, I'm out.